we're going to start now, 3 by 3. So hello everyone, welcome to the first conversation on art and science at the School of the Art Institute that I'm co-organizing with Andrew Yang as part of my residency there. So today I'm very happy to, maybe before talking about our speaker, this is a series that will go on until April 21st. Starting from now, we're going to have one speaker every week at 1:30 p.m. And next week, we're going to have Elisabeth Bouchot from La Reine Blanche Theatre in Paris. And Elisabeth will talk about her work on theater and how she merged theater and science, how she talk about science in the context of theater. She's a physicist and a playwright and an actor. And so her seminar the title of her seminar is Science on Stage. So I'll send you all the info once the poster is ready with the link. This talk will be public, so, which is not the case of this one. All right, so, and now I'm very happy to welcome Steve Pavlovsky from Liquid Light Lab. Liquid Light Lab is his work is a multidimensional. Liquid Light Lab is the work of Steve Pavlovsky, a multidimensional light artist from New York City. A majority of his work utilizes liquid projection, experimental media, and handmade organic element first seen in psychedelic light shows of the 60s. So you will see the connection with the class where we talk about patterns in nature and how physics can explain it. Following on the visual music tradition of Vasily Kandinsky, Thomas Wilfred, and the Joshua Light Show, Mr. Pavlovsky invokes the sublime and the spiritual. Building upon an analog relationship to light and time, Pavlovsky has created Liquid Light Lab, a living, breathing visual expression of music, nature, and the human spirit. Some notable collaboration have included work with the Allman Brothers at Madison Square Garden, the New York Public Library, HBO, Serpentine Galleries, and CUNY Advanced Science Research Center. So, Steve, you can start.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Very happy to be here. This is, the connections between art and science and patterns in nature. It's a topic that's dear to my heart as well. And as we'll see with some of the work that I do, with doing light shows, and especially the way that I do them, there's a real connection where you sort of have to be both an artist and also an engineer at the same time, and employ a lot of, sort of scientific methods as well to getting the stuff done. So let me go ahead and show you a little slideshow and, give a quick, quick overview of what I'm going to be doing here. So my talk's going to be about psychedelic liquid light shows and analog visuals. I hope to, let me get this going. All right, so I'm going to start off and I'm going to give just a very brief context and overview of 1960s psychedelic light shows. I'll give a quick demo of some liquids on an overhead projector. I will do a demo of Lumia, warp, and color wheel effects. Then I have a longer process video, which I filmed just for this class, and I'll be explaining various liquid interactions, video feedback, and video capture and mixing systems that I use. And at the end, hopefully if you have time, I have a 10-minute performance with a full analog and digital hybrid setup that I've done here in my studio. So, what is a liquid light show and what is a psychedelic light show? This is a great example here. This is the Joshua Light Show with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And, there's a bit of a misconception where the liquid light show is often mistaken for the psychedelic light show. The liquid part was really more just of one element of the broader psychedelic light show that started in the 1960s. And what it was in the 60s, you would have artists projecting live, manipulations of light, liquids, slides, all sort of effects on the screen in tandem with the musicians. And so while the liquid part is the most memorable of it, it is only one part of it. However, it is really the standout element, and it's one thing which I focus on, and I think will pertain to this class because the way that some of the liquids interact, there's also a lot of science and natural patterns that occur in that. So a little bit about them, again, they started in the 1960s, and it wasn't, the type of tradition that I come from is from the San Francisco tradition. However, it wasn't the only place that light shows started. Kind of like anything, like even if you have problems in science, you'll often hear people working on them, and multiple places will start working on the same problem. And light shows were similar in the same way. It wasn't just, San Francisco that did it. People all around the world, as soon as they discovered projectors and, they had access to, various lighting devices, it wasn't long before various people thought, oh, I can actually move this stuff and create moving images on the screen, and also do them with music. Here are just some photos of some older stuff. One of the interesting things about this art form is it started in like the earlier part of rock and roll, at the very genesis of it. And there really wasn't anything on there wasn't really much stage lighting, period. If you look at this venue here, there is no stage lighting. The light show was the stage lighting for these types of events. So it was not only there to illuminate, and create an atmosphere and everything, but it was also there to illuminate the bands as well. And you can see it's very psychedelic. It came from, this was during the counterculture revolution, and psychedelic substances were also a big part of everything. But in general, there was a real a lot of experimentation going on in culture all around, not just light shows, but music, art, and those kinds of things. So how are these light shows done? Here I have a great picture of the Joshua Light Show at the Fillmore East, and this uses a whole bunch of different things. At the top, you can see somebody there with some reflective devices and lights. You can see some slides. You can see some slide projectors, some modified overhead projectors. You can see a film projector, and there's a lot of people doing this. Here's a couple of more pictures. You can see some color wheels and different things that they would put in front of the lenses to create effects. And here's some more of it. And all of this stuff was handmade. There isn't really an industry for this stuff. Back then, there certainly wasn't. Even now, there isn't. To do this kind of a light show, you really have to, bring your ingenuity to it. And that's where the part of both artist and engineer come into play. And you can see some of these shows are pretty big. You can see all these projectors here at this show. We're getting a little bit closer. You can see some overhead projectors and some slide projectors going on. And because of the inventiveness, people had to kind of come up with whatever they could to to make light and images move. And one of the things that people really started using a lot was the liquid light show, as you can see here, which would be there's a lot of different ways to do liquids, but one of the classic ways to take some clock faces and squeeze them underneath overhead projectors and project them while the music is playing. What makes this also really really fun is that you can play in time with music with these types of methods. So it's not just like a visual backdrop that's like a wallpaper that's cold. It's actually alive and part of the show. But again, it wasn't just liquids during this time. A lot of slides and things like that were used as well. And it was a respected art form. If you look at these posters, you have legendary musicians like Jimi Hendrix, and the light show is named Joshua Light Show. Or the marquee, you could have the Beach Boys and the Joshua Light Show named, or the Grateful Dead. And there again, you see, if you look at old rock posters, the light show is always named. So it wasn't just like a side piece. It wasn't like a technical aspect. It was a real art that was, respected and treated as part of the show. And this sort of went on, from like, maybe like, let's say 1965 to like the early 70s. And light shows, of course, continued after that, but their importance somewhat dwindled, because now suddenly rock went from this genesis thing where you have venues of a couple of thousand people to suddenly arenas of 10-20,000 people, and the rock star is now the star of the show. The light show kind of took a back seat to it, but it did continue afterwards, and it's a tradition that I work with, and currently there's actually a very active community now working with this stuff again. Just a little quick overview of a couple of important figures pertaining specifically to the liquid light show. One of the first person that can kind of be considered the first liquid light show artist to use an overhead projector is this guy here, Elias Romero. He was of the Beat generation. This was pre-hippies. This was like the late 50s, early 60s. And he would do this stuff with jazz performances. You know, again, this was the Beat culture. This was, you know, late 50s, early 60s. He did get the idea from this gentleman here, Seymour Locke, who was a professor at California State University, who was interested in old Bauhaus experiments that actually went back to the 30s, but he did a demonstration, was doing demonstrations at the school in the 50s, and Elias was one of the students there. Another very early person is this guy here on the right, Tony Martin, who again in the late 50s, early 60s started experimenting with liquid projection, but he also worked with film and slides and things like that. But he also worked at something called the Tape Music Center, which was an early experimental audiovisual establishment in San Francisco. And here's some of his artwork, some very early liquid projections by Tony Martin. And next we have this guy here, Bill Ham. So the kind of tradition that I come from can be said to be started by him because while the other folks did it with, jazz or experimental audiovisual performances, he's one of the first people to really do it with rock and roll and to do it with psychedelic rock and roll. There's Bill on the right. And he used overhead projectors and was primarily a liquid person. But again, this was maybe like, early 60s, 63, 64, but it wasn't, and then he started getting hired to do these other venues where some of the early rock bands started playing. But sure enough, people liked it. They thought it's cool. And suddenly you have other people. There's Bill now. He's still doing his thing. But sure enough, other people started doing it. This can still be considered the first generation of artists, although this guy came a little bit after. This guy's name is Glenn McKay, very influential artist. He toured with the Jefferson Airplane. Him and a guy named Jerry Abrams, they were considered some of the best light shows of that era. He is also very important because not only, because he was very good, but also through his touring, he was able to go around the country and also to other countries and kind of share the San Francisco style. And again, liquids weren't the only thing. They also used, slide projectors and color wheels and things of that nature. But he is also connected to the Joshua Light Show, which is probably the most famous and arguably the best light show of the era. A little bit later on, Bill Graham, who was a rock promoter, started the Fillmore, and then he started the Fillmore West and started the Fillmore East, hired the Joshua Light Show to be the house light show at the Fillmore East. And here it was started by Joshua White, who's a friend of mine and mentor to me. And what really made them stand out is they had a residency, a full-time residency here at the venue, the Fillmore East here in New York City. And what really helped is while light shows pretty much everywhere else would have to load in on Thursday, set up all this crazy stuff, and load out on Sunday, they had a permanent installation. So here is the Fillmore West with the screen pulled up. They projected from the back of the screen. And all the time they had all of this stuff here. So instead of having to break down the show and spend all that time building it, they were able to dedicate time to actually perfecting it and really, just adding more and more stuff to it. They also had I believe it was a film school next to it. So they were able to bring in a lot of students and technical people. So it was really the right place at the right time. They really made the Joshua Light Show happen and, become this, considered the best light show of that era. And again, they employed anything imaginable. Lumia, which is, the art of pure light. They used liquid projection, slide projection, film, you name it. Here's a very famous photo of them with Frank Zappa. Here's Joshua now, and they're still doing some work. Joshua Light Show is officially retired, but I think it's like the mafia. You never really get out. We talk all the time about light shows, and it never leaves. you know. So, and this is some later work they did maybe 5 years ago, and you know, he's been doing it for 50 years, and you know, done some really beautiful work. And as technology evolved, he was able to bring in modern technology into this show and really, you know, make it a beautiful, beautiful show. And before we go on, this was kind of like, again, a very basic, quick overview of some of the early people, because I just want to set the context. But if we really want to talk about light art, it's very important to mention this man, Thomas Wilfred. Thomas Wilfred is really the founder of what's called Lumia, which is light art. It's the first time that light itself was used as a pure medium. And you can see some of the things that he did. This is, again, he started maybe like the 20s, going through the 30s. Eventually, you know, he had an installation in the basement of the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, which, from my understanding, was actually the most visited installation at the museum at the time in the 50s. Sadly, he kind of, I wouldn't say got forgotten, but, you know, is not talked about as much. And so one of the things that, you know, I do and a lot of light artists do is try to remember him and make sure that, you know, his art is remembered. But he used some incredible machines. You know, he would take light and refract them with these various metal plates, or he would have some spinning color discs. And again, it was really about using light as the brush. He was actually studied as a painter, and he noticed that, you know, made a great observation that when you paint, at any time you paint light, it's kind of false to paint light on a static image, because light is always moving. You know, light throughout the day changes. You know, any light, even ambient light in a room, it's constantly changing. So light itself is actually a four-dimensional object. It's moving through time. And so he wanted to incorporate that as well into his work. He has also, besides doing, you know, making color organs, which is what we saw before, I should have mentioned that, it's called a Clavolux, which he would basically have this big keyboard and lights with different colored glass and reflective things and project these beautiful images. He also made some home models of this stuff as well. And what's really interesting about him is that, and I think it's spot on, is, you know, he was doing his work right around that time when Albert Einstein became very famous, you know, and suddenly, you know, concepts of like time and light, and, you know, and especially in astronomy, so were also popularized ideas. You know, this was a time when the common person would now read, you know, in the newspaper about the newest discovery that Einstein made or somebody else. So, you know, he was very much in tune with this revolution that was happening, you know, at the time, and wanted to, you know, bring the aesthetic element of controlling light into it. So that is the, you know, the brief overview of the history of it. You know, and again, it's a very broad topic, and we can do a whole series of classes just on the history. But what I really want to get into is some of the processes, because that, I think, pertains to the subject matter of this class. So let me go ahead and share first video that I'm going to share. It's a quick 2-minute video that shows a basic, what's known as a squash plate on a overhead projector. And you'll see some later on, we're going to go to video capture devices, but it's important to show the overhead projector because it's a true analog instrument. You know, it's just light, lenses, and liquids, and that's it. So this is a quick 2-minute demo with some cheesy fonts. And I think you guys can see it, right? And so you have an overhead projector. You can put a circle mask on it, take some convex glass, and you can start filling it up with different liquids. Here we have mineral oil. And you can see the three-dimensionality right here of the oil actually being projected, which is something that's great on an overhead projector, which you don't really get with video capture. Here I threw in some oil dyes. We can throw in some isopropyl alcohol. Again, this is sped up, you know, but we also throw in some water, and you can see it kind of freaking out up there at the top. Oil and, isopropyl alcohol and water, when they come together, do some pretty interesting things, especially while they're in a substrate of mineral oil. You know, I think that's probably common knowledge, but just to reiterate, oil and water do not mix. they are totally different substances. And also in a density tower, oil will float on top of water. And so by kind of, putting these three things together with special oil dyes and water dyes, you can, put it between these pieces of convex glass and start getting these really interesting shapes, and also control them by hand. And what I like about this technique especially is that it's philosophically embodies, in my opinion, what a good light show should be, where it's got natural elements, it's hands on, you're fully in tune, you're basically touching the screen with your hands by by working with this medium. There's no real intermediary in between. So it's a very pure type of it's a very pure way to project onto a screen and also react to things in real time. You're in the same phase of space-time as the performance is going. And so again, adding different things to different layers. And my next video, 2 videos down, we'll also get into a bit more the details of this stuff slowed down. As you saw there, I also added another projector because it's important to note that, light works by also mixing with other light. It's a very, very cool, an important element of it. Let me go and show another video. This will be a quick video of some Lumia stuff that's created through diffraction of a warp wheel and also a color wheel. So I'll have a beam that's going to be passing through a color wheel, through a warp wheel, and then you'll see some of the effects. And it's one of my favorite effects. So here we go. So you can see this projector here, this color wheel spinning. I have this warped piece of plexiglass, and you can see on the screen this image moving. Now that projection is actually a static image. That the image itself, or like the Mona Lisa here, is just a static image. But by putting a warped piece of glass in front of it, you start bending the light. One thing I also really like about this technique, which we'll see in my performance later on, is it creates a secondary refraction where the light not only affects the beam, but it spills out and will kind of cast light, across the whole room. And that is effect that I really, really like. So let's get on with the, so this is going to be a longer video. This is about 32 minutes, and I'll going through a variety of different video capture system, a video capture system that I use, and I'll be going through a couple of different types of liquid interactions. I'll also be going through some video feedback, and then how I blend all this stuff together. And this is the kind of approach that I use when I do a bigger show. Like I've done some, when I do it with on a big screen, it's really not feasible to bring an overhead projector to a large concert venue. You can do that in a small place, but once you get to a certain size of venue, you have to, use a digital projector or a video wall or something like that. So that's when also you incorporate, live cameras and light tables, video mixers. I also do use computers as well now. Even though it's kind of philosophically opposed to the true nature of, a handmade light show, but you got to do what you got to do, because it's, things progress. So let's go on with this demo. So here I am. Here I am in my studio. So you can see I got one camera up there. I got another camera there. It's on a Lazy Susan, so I can move it. Below, I have some light tables. I have a couple of pieces of clock glass. I have some Petri dishes, some more Petri dishes. In the back, I have a video feedback system, which is one of my favorite things to do. I'll be talking about that as well. Well, and also to my right there, I have a computer, which plays video clips. And of course, I have a video mixer, and that allows me to mix these different things together. So here's the camera. And so, starting to just going to slowly work this plate up. As we said before, you have different elements, typically mineral oil, which I'm pouring in here, water, isopropyl alcohol, glycerin are good ones. Here, I'm throwing in some oil colored dye. It's important to color the substance with what it is based in. So if it's oil, you have to color it with an oil-based dye. If it's water, you have to color it with a water-based dye, because again, these things are fundamentally won't mix. And so we're going to start off a little slow here, but by kind of just dropping these plates in, the yellow will just start sitting there, and I can kind of move it around as well. I'm going to go ahead and put some water into it now. And so still a little dim. In a second, I'm going to change the aperture on the camera. When using camera systems, there are so many variants that the camera itself will do to the image. So you can see suddenly I just changed the exposure, and boom, that yellow came out. Now you can see these bubbles kind of hanging out there, and that is the water, again, just kind of isolated by itself in in the mineral oil. Now I am adding a water-based dye to it, so it's only going to stay within the water part. And so you can kind of almost see where the water is, even though it's invisible here in this image. By tracing that red, you can start seeing where the water actually is. Now, a lot of these interactions really, it's based on surface tension. The way the different bubbles do things. It's all different surface tension interactions, and we'll see that with some of the other effects. So yeah, it's kind of just spinning around, doing this thing, and so it's kind of just hanging out there. So now I'm going to take another plate and squish it, and you can see that by squishing it, I'm kind of able to control it. You can see my hands in this, but if I zoom in the camera a bit more, or if I put some kind of a mask on the stage, you won't see my hands, and the artwork itself will be isolated. I figured, you know what? I didn't think there was enough red in there. Actually, I'm sorry, that I didn't feel that the oil was colored enough, so I threw some orange in there. So you can kind of see it leaving these streaks inside the oil. You can also see some bubbles as well, which is also cool. That's also kind of another, element that can put in there into these things is air itself. Sometimes bubbles will get trapped. And so we have this plate here, and it's kind of whatever, it's still building up to it. I have not added any alcohol to this yet. And I think that I kind of like to do this during demonstrations because you'll see what the effects of the alcohol are. And again, in a density tower, it'll be water, alcohol, and oil on top. And oil and water won't mix, but alcohol and water will mix. So when they mix, their surface tension changes, and as does the density. And suddenly where we had this plate before, it was kind of like, whatever, you can see these more defined bubbles that formed inside of there. Because again, we changed the surface tension of the, of the water and alcohol together, and now they can interact with the oil in an interesting way. So we're going to get away from this for a second and move on to something else that could be considered a blow plate. And what I'm going to do here is fill this up with water this time. Earlier, I did it with mineral oil, but here I'm just going to do just a bed of water. And so I'll grab the water or put the water away. And now I'm going to grab an oil dye. So remember, we said that oil floats on top of water. And so we're going to drop some of that stuff in, and boom. You can see how it kind of just spreads over it. It slowly kind of grows and just kind of hangs out there on top of it. So we'll start blowing on it if I want to get it to move around. And hence why it's called a blow plate. So you can do it with, you can use your mouth, you can use a straw, or in a little bit, we'll also see, we'll do a fan. And so you get these really cool, these really cool sort of, swirly type patterns going on. Or maybe, I don't know if you want to, I don't know how I would describe them, but they're, yeah, maybe swirly. I don't know. But so now I'm actually putting a fan onto it. So rather than blowing on it myself, I can automate it and have a fan going. Actually, I was mistaken. I'm putting the fan on, I think, now. And let me also, again, change the exposure on the camera, and now you can see the, you can see the liquids come out. So there's the fan, and now I'm just going to automate it and let it do its thing, and I can kind of be free to do other things. Again, the other thing that I dropped in there, that was red oil dye as well. Now I am mixing, using my video mixer, the two elements that I just made together. So I have that blow plate, which is kind of just hanging out there. I just kind of, increased the airflow on it, and now it's moving around. And now I am just mixing these two things together. And again, just kind of just demonstrating the way that you can blend these together. And, I'm experimenting with different blend modes, and, now you have these elements coming together. So you're creating a composition now from individual elements. And again, you can see that squash plate that I had earlier. You can see those bubbles that really came out, which weren't there before until we added the isopropyl alcohol. And then so this effect kind of, the blow plate, which is going, it has a limited lifespan. Eventually, as you saw when we started it, it had these big lobes and big defined shapes. But as more and more air blows on it, you can see them getting smaller and smaller. And the stuff kind of just mixes in over and over again. Here now on the squash plate, I'm going to add a layer, something on the top layer. So I'm going to add in I just put in some water there, and also going to add some mineral oil to it. And we'll see in a second, I'm going to add some colors to that. All right, here's a blue oil-based dye that I'm going to add to it. Actually, sorry, that was actually a red oil-based dye. I do add the blue in a little bit. And let me move the video mixer back. And so now you have this other layer on top, sort of swirling around, which is that oil and water layer on top. And as that oil dye is mixing in, until it's fully mixed in with the mineral oil, you'll have these swirly patterns going on. So, and here is when I add the blue. I think my thoughts were, okay, I need a little bit more contrast. Everything's pastel and it's pretty, but let's get some juxtaposition going on. So now I threw that blue in there. And as I start moving it around, and you can already see that on the blow plate, you can see how the colors kind of started to lose those big defined shapes and look almost like I don't know, intestines or something like that now. But again, this top plate of the squash plate has this swirling around as it's starting to mix in with, that's that layer of mineral oil on top with the oil dye in it. And of course, a little bit of water, which is kind of separating it, which is kind of that, bubble in the middle is kind of helping create some shapes as well. And yeah, I'm just messing around, I think, with different blend modes while I'm doing this, trying to find the right one, So, all right, and then and again, this is still that top layer, and I'm gonna play around with it a little bit more. But now the shapes are becoming a little bit more defined as I've played with it a bit more. And you can also see the red and the blue now are slowly mixing in, but still separate. Oil is a lot more viscous than water, so things take much longer to fully blend in with mineral oil as opposed to water. Now, this plate that just has water and oil dye on top, I am now adding in some mineral oil as well. And you can see sort of get these almost, planetary-like shapes happening once that oil dye is thrown in there. And one of the things I really like about, especially the liquid light show is that, it aesthetically resembles so many things in nature, everything from small microbial things to big cosmic shapes. You can kind of almost see them all in this type of artwork. And I know there was, I think Servine had a talk earlier, which I watched, and she explained, some of the scientific principles behind these shapes, which happen at all scales in nature. And here, we see them in between the micro and the macrocosmos. Here at our human scale, we can create them and make art with them. So again, here I'm just kind of, blending, playing around with it, and I just kind of playing around with it, just trying to find something I think looks cool. A lot of my work is very experimental, so constantly trying different things. But now we're going to move the camera onto another petri dish, and we're going to do one of my favorite things, and I believe I believe I invented this technique because I have not seen it anywhere else, but it involves glycerin. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put a bed of glycerin. So some things that won't mix as well, water will kind of mix with glycerin, but very, very slowly. But oil and alcohol will not mix with it. And this is very important to this process here. And there's also a really funny blooper coming up, which is why I kind of recorded this earlier, because this process is sort of haphazard. So it, sometimes things don't work out. So there's actually a lot of editing that, had to happen here, but, hopefully puts on a better show. So you have a bed of glycerin at the bottom. Now I'm going to take some water colors. And this is Dr. Martin's Synchromatic Transparent Watercolor. And as you drop it in, like I said, water does mix with glycerin, but very, very slowly. And you can see it as it slowly starts, propagating through the glycerin, sort of these like, these shapes, these sort of like leaves, or these, electrical, almost like electricity or something, shapes start coming out of it. And it's a very slow process, You can let this, if you do this and wait about 5 minutes, it'll eventually spread through the whole thing. Because it will slowly keep spreading. But here I am, I just keep on dropping different things and, sort of doing what can be considered a marbling effect on top of the glycerin. And this is just half of it. We haven't added any oil to it or the alcohol, which is, very useful, very useful ingredient in this stuff. So here I added in some yellow again, just kind of to do some contrast. I think contrast is always good aesthetically. So, kind of going back and forth with this marbling of it. And I think, let's see what else. So it is, again, it is a very slow process, but it will eventually cover the whole plate. I think in another second I'll be dropping another color in. Yep, and here we go. Again, this is still water dye. Again, it's called Synchromatic Transparent. It's from Dr. Martin's, and it's a very good water-based dye because it's it's very clean. Sometimes these dyes will have like sediments in them, but this is a very translucent dye, so it's very good for that. Here we go. We're throwing in some yellow, but of course it's mixing in, and it's mixing in and creating green. All right, and so I figured since this process does take a while, I'd also show off some of the things that I like to put in front of the camera lenses. So different types of, prisms or different kinds of filters, you put these over the lens and you can start creating some really cool shapes. And we'll also see a little bit of a blooper in a second. So here I'm taking another another sort of, it's called a mirage lens. That's technically what the name for one of these effects is. And you can screw them onto the lens. And here I am trying to take a diffraction grating filter, and you can kind of see how it's, I'm trying to screw it in. Oh, and there it goes. So there's the haphazardness of doing analog light shows. So the filter dropped in, and that's it. It ruined the effect. I figured, you know what, film it for a little bit, but we're going to start again. So what I ended up doing is in between this, I went and I cleaned the plate, and as opposed to the other plate, which was pretty dry, this still has now a little bit of water left in it. And also, it was also the end of the glycerin bottle, which also started bringing air into it. So the bubbles started to get stuck into it. And I'm kind of just moving, the plate around to try and get the glycerin to kind of cover the whole bottom. But, let's start again. So we're going to throw in some watercolor, but now the shapes are going to be just a little bit different because there is actually water in this mixture. And you'll see it's a bit more angular or leaf-like as it spreads, as opposed to before where we had a pure glycerin and water dye base. These shapes, you can see they're already, the dye itself is mixing in with whatever water's there. So it's a bit thinner now, actually. So you can see those shapes now are kind of becoming more elongated and, and a little bit thinner because, again, there's already water in there to thin out that water dye. So kind of just hanging out, letting it do its thing, put another color in there. And slowly, I'm just marbling on top of the glycerin. I believe there was a magenta that I threw in there. And now you can see actually, you give it a few minutes. Now, again, it's surface tension. The watercolors themselves have different surface tensions. They don't all propagate through the glycerin at the same rate, depending on, whatever substance is used to make one thing yellow, what's used to make something else red, what's used to make something else blue. Those things themselves affect the surface tension qualities of the inks themselves. And so you'll see that some of them, will kind of just hang out in the glycerin, while others will just, boom, spread right across them. So certain things are a bit stronger than other ones, like the blue, for instance, that's really pushing its way through, while that yellow earlier just kind of stood there. So now we have this, sort of, I don't know, almost like a flower pattern kind of coming out of there. And again, I guess I like to play with danger. Here I am again playing around with another one of these lenses. Just to kind of, I like doing things to kind of break up the image a bit and create repetition within it. And that's what these mirage lenses or prism lenses are really good for. All right, and so now we got a cool shape. I think that over here we kind of still have a little bit of, water stuck in here that didn't quite make it, or I'm not actually sure what's creating those little, I think that might be air actually. Let's wait for my hand to get out of the way. Oh yeah, I decided to screw it on. So I think this might actually be air in here that was stuck in, that's kind of just trapped inside the glycerin. And now I have the mirage lens actually screwed on to the lens, and and I can spin it as I'm doing there. All right, so now here comes the fun part. Now we've just had watercolor and glycerin, but now we're going to go ahead. I think. Let's wait and see what I actually did. But pretty soon we're going to add in. Right. So I guess I threw in a little bit more. No, actually, there is, I believe. No, that is still a watercolor. But as you can see, as I put in that watercolor, it now pushed that blue even further into the design that was being created there. Okay, but now I think we're taking an oil dye. So this will be the first time I think we drop an oil dye in there. And you'll see, you know, how much different it behaves compared to just the water dyes. So boom, you can see it's really pushes this stuff aside. And it's much faster, and it is floating or staying on top of the glycerin. In the density tower, the oil will stay on top of it. So now, you know, we're adding some more in. It's really pushing all of that watercolor aside, and also pushing the watercolor kind of into the glycerin a bit more. And, you know, it really just spreads it out. And so now you're getting a layer of oil dye that's slowly spreading on top of the glycerin and this other pattern that we have. So now it's kind of propagated throughout it. And now we're going to see something cool. I'm going to go ahead. I guess I'm throwing a little bit more. I guess I threw some blue in there as well. But now we're going to go ahead and grab some isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle. And this is really neat, right? So you see the solid image, and the moment we spray it, boom. You can see what happened. So what happened is, again, it's a surface tension thing where the introduction of alcohol to this sort of forced all of that oil into these tiny, tiny bubbles. So it kind of shrunk all of those oil bubbles. So all that oil, wherever the alcohol sprayed, you know, pushed it aside and, you know, shrunk it. However, isopropyl alcohol, especially 91%, it evaporates, and it evaporates very quickly. So as it starts evaporating from this immiscible mixture, or I can blow on it as well and increase the rate at which it evaporates, suddenly it all comes back together again. And you can do this over and over again. Or here, the introduction of alcohol again into the other blow plate, you know, starts causing these other interesting reactions. And, you know, you can keep spraying it in there and it'll kind of just make all this stuff freak out. So it's sort of like when the alcohol is, you know, binding together with the water, is really when you start getting all these interesting effects and motions going on. And again, it also muddies, you know, the one downfall is that while it does some really cool shapes, it also completely destroys any, you know, any separation of the colors that you might have had. And it gets muddy really quick, but it does make some interesting movement going on. So I think here, just for demonstration, we kind of, oh yeah, so earlier I had another layer of, you know, I had that layer of red and blue on top of the plate, and I just wasn't feeling it. You know, I didn't think it looked that great. I thought it was kind of covering up the artwork underneath it. So whatever, just pull it off. And I'm gonna take that plate off and also use another plate. And there's different curvatures of plates. So this one is a bit more curved. And what you can see is this one, because it's a bit more curved, it actually is a little bit better at sort of slicing through, you know, the mineral oil. And so, or the liquid light mixture. And it kind of, instead of it sort of being a broader, flatter thing, it's more curved up, and it kind of allows it to, you know, it pushes things aside and breaks it up a bit more. And I personally like these kinds of plates better. I added some more alcohol in there just to kind of get some more definition of the shapes. And the alcohol will kind of be on the outside of this, but I am sort of moving it around. And what I'm trying to do with the plate actually is kind of scoop it. I'm trying to kind of go on the outside of it and push it from the outside in. So just try to like mix it in all together. I just wanted to show that because show that different glass as well can do different things. So now we're going to stop on the liquids, but we're going to get into another really, really awesome effect. And this is video feedback. And what I have here is a flat panel, and I have what's called a visual presenter, which that's a camera on top. And I have this running through a video mixer, but I have effectively a camera that is connected to the camera. And so the camera is seeing basically itself. It's sort of the same principle as you take two mirrors and have them across from each other, you'll create this infinity thing going on. And, you know, a video feedback will do the same thing. So the camera and the, you know, the LED tablet that I have there are, you know, are connected, and one is feeding back into you know, one is feeding back into the other. And again, you know, I'm sure, you know, video, you know, or just feedback in general is found all around nature. You know, our bodies regulate itself through feedback. You know, and so many natural processes just happen from feedback, from the output going into the input. A fractal equation is, you know, an iteration of the last part going back into the beginning. And by doing things with the camera, for instance, like twisting it around or changing its properties or zooming in or changing the, you know, maybe changing the position of the, moving the TV around, I can start creating different shapes as well. Definitely with, you know, with video feedback, the camera settings matter a lot. So contrast, color, you know, luminance, those all affect the designs. I also have a video mixer here, which can add effects to it. So I can add a mirroring to effect to it, where I can split the screen and start getting some interesting shapes going on as well. So here I have, you know, kind of back to the spiral, but I think in a second I drop in some, yeah, or actually here I did a positive and negative effect. So what I do is I invert the color, but because it's a feedback loop, every time it goes through the feedback loop, it's inverting that color. So it starts creating these stripes. It goes through once, it's a light color. It goes through the feedback loop again, it's a darker color. It goes through again, it's light, et cetera, et cetera. And so you get these really cool stripes that start happening if you add a color version effect to it. So now here I'm kind of adding some mirroring effects to it, and I'm splitting the screen. And so now we get some really cool symmetry going on. And, you know, you can really just play around with this stuff all day. Like there's really there's no end to the types of patterns that you can make. Here I do a mirroring, but instead of splitting into 2, I split it into, I believe, 8. So you have 8 different, you know, one slice is basically repeated 8 times here, but again, mirrored every time it goes through that. And this is all just generative. It's generating on the spot. There is no computer. It's just a purely natural process at work here. You know, so here I have another mirroring effect where I kind of have it in quads. So the top left is mirrored to the top right, down to the bottom right, and over to the bottom left. You get some really, really interesting mandala-like patterns when you do this. You know, and then, you know, and again, it's really fun. It's one of my favorite things to do. So we also did video feedback where you know, earlier I was doing a camera and a TV, but I also have underneath there that box that I have. It's actually a color corrector, an old Radio Shack color corrector used for video. And what I'm actually doing here is a feedback loop through the video mixer. However, it's purely signal based. So I'm taking the output of the video mixer, running it into the input of the color corrector, output of the color corrector back into the video mixer. And again, that is how your feedback loop is happening. And similar to a camera where you have different parameters with the colors or the contrast, because this is a color corrector, this has you know, intensity, chroma, burst, and hue effects. And by, you know, changing those around, all those cool stripes happen. And now I'm actually blending in both the signal-based feedback as well as the camera-based feedback. You know, and I think it's, you know, and I think sometimes this stuff, you know, definitely resembles some of the, you know, the shapes that we've seen. I forget, during Servine's talk, she mentioned that, I forget the names. It's 2, I believe, Russian names, but it's that oscillating effect where you take some chemicals and it'll kind of do this oscillation over and over again. My final piece of equipment I just wanted to show, because this, you know, getting into the modern take of things, is a computer. So using VJ tools is something that's, you know, common and that I use all the time in my show. And here I have different video clips of artwork. This particular video clip is actually what's called a heat plate, where I took a plate of glass with some oils, and then I took a heat gun and I heated it up. So it's not actually, it kind of looks a little bit like the alcohol, but it's actually the liquids are being heated up through a heat gun it went away, but it's going to come back in a bit. Some of these other effects that I have are artwork that I've created where I've taken a really long kaleidoscope and aimed it at a TV, or maybe I took some glass and put it in front of the kaleidoscope, then had an image on the TV behind it. So these are kind of complicated things that would really not be logically feasible to do in a live setting. But if you record these at home in a studio, you can throw them in your VJ software and bring them in. VJ software also has its own effects. So here I can do like a color separation. And I can also do video feedback with a digital video feedback, which is okay. Here I'm putting it in, and it's kind of cool, but it's not as, it's more, I guess, angular, or it's more sterile in some ways than the analog video feedback, because it's just a computer simulating it. But still pretty cool. And this effect that I was saying, again, that stuff moving is actually heat and bubbles kind of forming as as these things heat up, and it's air moving around through different temperature. I'm also changing some color, again, with the VJ tools, is just very popular, is very powerful, and you can, add all sorts of effects to your clips. You can also take a live camera and add that in as well. I don't have that quite here yet, but, and at this point, I've kind of have all this stuff set up. So I'm just playing around with my video mixer and experimenting with these different, with this different artwork that I've done, and just trying to get a good look. I kind of have, certain things I look for. So I'm just kind of playing around with it, and so here I kind of have a keying effect, which is really, takes out the dark, or I think here it's actually taking out the light spots and, sort of creating a mask, and through video showing what's there behind it. So that is, that's that. And so if I may, I hope this wasn't too fast or whatever, but if I may, I have another, if we have time, do you have time for a quick performance?
Yeah, we started 5 minutes later, so
okay,
we can take 5 minutes.
All right, cool. Yeah, so I'm gonna play a performance which I did here in my studio. This was, when quarantine hit. I was like, what the heck are we going to do? So one of the things I did is I set up pretty much every analog device I can, color wheels, slide projectors, Lumia, and created this command center that I don't think I would ever be able to, bring out live. But since we're in quarantine and we didn't know what to do, I went ahead and did this performance. And it's with a band actually from Chicago called the Bitchin Bajas, if anybody's ever heard of them. They're really cool, and they play music that I love to jam through, because it's very repetitive and cyclical and electronic, but it builds up and it builds up. So let's go ahead and play this, and we'll open up some stuff for questions. So I hope you guys enjoy the show. And again, this is just my studio with different color wheels, and you can see some mirror effects, and I have some slides and overhead and all kinds of crazy stuff. right. So the performances go on for a bit longer, but so the performances go on for a bit longer, but you know, we'll do a Q&A and all that. So hope you guys enjoyed a little bit of that. I thought it was important to show the performance because, you know, a light show is usually performed with music. So not having music there is only 50% of the art. So I wanted to show that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That was very cool actually to see all the stuff that you introduced in
Yeah,
context
yeah.
like this. I'm glad you were able to show that. Thank you very much for this beautiful talk. I have many questions. Um, Perhaps I have just one to start. That is, so all the stuff that you showed might resonate a lot in the in for the students who are following my class, resonate a lot with what we see, what we are doing during the class. In particular, when you talk about surface tension, the fact that alcohol can generate these flows. A lot of the patterns that you see. We actually did a liquid light show that I prepared by
Oh,
watching
cool.
your videos. Light show I mean, not exactly with the right ingredient. We did a minimal one, but so there is one pattern that we didn't see during that home lab that we didn't do, is the branching one that you did, the one that you never saw anywhere else,
Oh,
your signature trick.
well, it wasn't,
Um,
yeah, it wasn't
and
actually the branching pattern, but the spraying of the alcohol, you know, covering a bed of glycerin with alcohol, you know, oil, and then spraying it and then creating that sort of thing that then shrinks and then grows. That part, yeah,
Suddenly,
that part, I'm sure other people have done the glycerin, but with the alcohol, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I've been
um,
told by some of the old timers that they've never seen that before.
I've definitely never seen that. I've never seen that in visual, and the dynamic is very interesting. Yeah, I'm talking about this part. There are also
Yeah,
these
yeah.
branches I was interested in, and I have, yeah. So I guess I have two sounds question to open this Q&A, and the first one is like, when you create these branches, I'm trying to understand the physics that is happening. Um, if it's something known or if it's a cool question to that a scientist like me could explore. How much influence, like, do you have an intuition what is happening? Like, is it like the droplet that is eventually spreading just because it's taking a shape where it's eventually
Yeah.
on top of the glycerin, or is it like some osmotic pressure, the glycerol is absorbing the water, which create like the
Yeah,
push?
yeah, the glycerin. Yeah, so yeah, definitely the glycerin is absorbing the water. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the water. Yeah, so it's kind of soaking into it. Yeah. Hmm.
It's a branching pattern that is mediated by the fact that glycerin absorb this dye, but
Correct.
this dye mix this dye mix with the glycerin, right? There is no surface tension here.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, it's yeah, exactly. It's just mixing in together. So it, you know, it appears that it's spread, but you know, that's creating these branches. But as it's, however it's propagating, you know, and I'm not really sure, you know, on a microscopic level how that's happening.
And
But it is being soaked up by it. Yeah.
And have you played with the amount of water in like the glycerol that you put, the glycerin? You can mix it with water. You say at some point that you had water.
Yeah, yeah, it does, but it makes the shapes won't be as defined. You know, you could, but they're kind of be more, you know, I like to kind of work in more defined shapes if I can. You know, again, sometimes things happen, you don't have any control over them, but yeah, otherwise it will be sort of blotchy. I mean, it's kind of cool actually. I mean, you know, and yeah, and it could look blotchy as well. I don't use it, but it's nothing, you know, that's just my personal aesthetic. Yeah.
Hmm.
And actually, the image that I did that was used for I had Nature did a the you know the scientific journal did a article where there was some new you know discoveries in sort of phase separation in parts of cells. And they used some of my artwork actually for the cover of that, which I'll get in a second. But that actually was a bit blotchy. Here, I'll show you.
Oh yes, that's
So
actually
yeah, that
the picture that we use for.
this so it could be blotchy and it could look cool and you can get published in Nature with something like this.
Very fun. And the second stage where you put the alcohol and suddenly everything disappear.
Yeah.
Did you play with the parameter? Can you tweak by changing the liquids? Can you change the dynamic of this process? And
I mean, like I said, the dyes themselves do have different surface tension and slightly different densities, So I found that like the red spreads really fast, over everything. The yellow, not so much. Green, not so much. Blue spreads really well on top of water. For some reason, it doesn't spread as quickly on top of the glycerin.
hmm.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. It's something that struck me in your work is that you kind of work like we do as a scientist, me or Severin. I think Severin is also here today. Like playing with liquids and eventually trying to infer and like to use it for something. Like generally we develop this we develop theories or things that allow us to eventually reproduce this experiment. In
Mhm.
your case, you are like optimizing this visuality, like this visual aesthetic, and that's a very interesting parallel. I mean, I'm probably biased because I have a practice that is also a kind of
Mhm.
some similitude with yours, but this is very interesting. Like how I mean, when I'm seeing your work, I have the feeling that you are working a bit like a scientist at the end, despite your like an experimental scientist.
Yeah, a little bit, I mean, I'm, definitely interested in, how this stuff works. I'm a science enthusiast. I'm not a real scientist. I think I have way too much ADD to do real science. So that's why I do the art part instead.
I see. Yeah, I mean, it's maybe not completely incompatible, but that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's
I mean, I do feel that they're kind of both sides of the same coin, I mean, ultimately it's the human experience, and this is my opinion of it, but I think, it's our human, experience of these things, of nature. So you can experience it through learning. You can experience nature through learning about it. You can experience nature through also playing around with it as well.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I can relate with that. Before maybe opening to question from the audience.
Yeah.
Um, um, there is something that is very interesting also in your work is the way you blend a practice that is very organic, very real with technology. And I
Yeah.
think that this is clear when we see this picture from the Joshua light show, like it's a huge installation. And eventually you were able to narrow things down and develop also your tricks by using technology. I was wondering how the practice this practice evolved with technology and how and can you in other words can also would you be able with the technology available right now to do what Joshua was able to do in the Fillmore East with his big installation with your minimal more minimal setup. uh,
It's I'll say I'll do it as a cautious yes, because it's minimalistic. And the new Joshua Light Show actually incorporates, because Joshua Light Show has several people, so as one person you can only do so much. You only have so many hands, which is also why I incorporate computers and some automation. But the Joshua Light Show does, use like video capture things, or they will use computers to create an image on a digital projector, but then they will refract it with, let's say, something, like Mylar or something like that.
mm,
So it's I'll do it as a cautious yes, but it's no Joshua Light Show.
I see. And so when you I guess technology is also part of your process. So we've seen you playing with liquid, but I mean, I'm wondering how do you develop uh, new tricks? How do you explore? Like in other words, like what part research and development take in your practice? How much time you spend trying to
Oh,
explore new things?
Oh, always. My whole career, I've been doing this for 14 years. And I've always experimented with different things and different technology. At the heart of it is the idea that, you want to treat it as a visual instrument. You want to be able to control it. You don't want the computer to do the work for you, even though it can be a part of it. Same way that you play a guitar or any kind of instrument, you want to have that level of connection between your hands, your mind, your hands, and what's on the screen. And so, you know, again, with like, you know, let's say video feedback or different types of video synthesizers, or, you know, things that are still, you know, not fully, you know, computerized, it might be automated in some way. You know, I've always done that kind of work, and it's not a necessity. You know, I generally, I do collaborate with people, but I generally work alone. So there's only so much a person can do. So I'm, you know, in addition to being interested, like, oh, I wonder what happened if I would mix this device with this device, what would happen? You know, and but in addition to also, oh, I can use this to kind of, you know, do what somebody else might be doing.
Mm,
You know.
I see. Very interesting. So let's open now to like people can ask question if they want. So is there any question from the audience for Steve?
I have one.
Andrew?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for the talk. I'm also a instructor here at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I help organize the conversations in art and science. And so I just really enjoyed this. I love seeing sort of analog-based visuals, you know, in a time where everything is so, you know, saturated with the digital. It's just so refreshing to see this kind of work, and just how improvisational it is. And so it makes so much sense to me as you're going through the history of the light shows that people are sort of playing music live, and then you're riffing. It's almost like jazz, like you're doing this sort of like parallel performance that's visual.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So that's so compelling to me. And I think one thing I just thought in terms of your practice and Baudouin's was in the performance you just showed at the very end, that sort of cut between the visuals and then you in the space, sort of orchestrating, that really sunk in why Baudouin sort of is also so interested in your work, because I saw so many interesting parallels in that creating this performative space where for you, you're creating visuals, but you're also immersed in your own sort of stage, right? You've got all of these apparatuses sort of moving around you. And so it's not just that you're creating an immersive experience for the viewer, you're creating an immersive experience for yourself. And I really feel that sensibility in Baudouin's work as well. So it was just interesting to see it coming from these two different directions in these two different ways. It's quite exciting. And it made me think too, and another thing that I guess struck me in terms of Baudouin talking about experiments, but also about music, is that, I mean, do you feel like your background in music, Baudouin, also like is part of what led you to this kind of experimentation or performance in your own work?
Oh yeah, me definitely. Like I was, I mean, of course, science obviously is patterns and like, something that influenced me. But this desire to perform, like really, to be like Steve was also saying, like to be in real time, to be really, yeah, to be immersed in the real time, the real space with the music, with the audience. This is something that for me was very exciting and really come from my interest for music.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And if I could expand on that, you know, something that you mentioned, you know, the symbiosis between music and visuals, you know, we call it synesthesia, and there's an actual condition that some people have. I don't know how many people are familiar with it. Synesthesia is where people's senses are mixed. People will actually, they can like taste sound, you know, or they can hear color, you know, they can hear colors, and it's a real condition that some people have. But something that we try to do as artists that do this kind of thing is also, you know, it's not sort of music and then the visuals together, they exponentially amplify each other. And in your mind, you know, your mind, you know, where, you know, your experience happens, a whole other level that's exponentially greater than the sum of those two parts happens. And that's kind of the goal of what, you know, what we try to do as well.
Yeah, definitely relate with that. This idea of feedback that you are insisting on is really something that happened actually between the sound and the visuals. And when I perform, I play with a sound artist who are looking at the visual at the same time, and we are definitely communicating through this audiovisual space. With even if we don't speak to each other, we are really able to interact together. And because these practices are very improvisational, it's intrinsically improvisation, you build a real connection that in the end I think,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
we want to explore, like really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so
I just wanted to give you some props real quick, Steve, for getting on the cover of Nature.
Oh, thanks.
No small feat. That's the top science journal, right?
Thanks. Yeah, it wasn't the cover, but it was an article. But actually, it was the front page of the website that day, and
Oh, yeah.
it happened to be the day that Stephen Hawking died. So I have a screenshot of my art with like Steve. Yeah, it was yeah, a bit surreal. So yeah, so yeah, thanks.
I see.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Steve. That was fascinating. And I have a couple of questions. Hope I won't take up too much space. One is just, since music is such a main component to it, I'm wondering about just your practice. 14 years you've been in there. How big of a component is it when you prepare before you're going to go and perform with an artist? Are you also, you know, doing sets at home with that music? Is it, and how much is predetermined as well as your colors and everything? How much work goes into choosing that, and how much just happens on the spot, feeling it?
Right. So, you know, preparation, it's mostly technical preparation, you know, because it's so complicated and so many things can go wrong. You know, and you're moving it from, you know, one thing to another. You know, and you know, yeah, so you know, that's definitely more of the preparation. Before any gig, I'll do the setup, you know, beforehand. 9 times out of 10, it's all improvised. You know, everything is improvised. I kind of know what certain things will do. So if I see something or a certain type of emotion, you know, I might do like a kaleidoscope effect, or I might do kind of like sort of like a swirly, softer pattern. But if it's going to be hard, or if there's like a crescendo, maybe I'll really hit them with the video feedback or something like that.
Gotcha.
The exception was we did a show with the Allman Brothers at Madison Square Garden last year. And it was actually turned out to be the last show before quarantine because New York City literally shut down. And I had never done anything that big before. You know, biggest show I did was like a festival with maybe 15,000 people. This is like I'm from New York too. So there's a 20,000 person arena. I've been to Madison Square Garden millions of times. So that was the only time that I literally practiced every day. You know, I wanted, because that was like, you know, the biggest show of my life. So that was the only time I really practiced, you know, set list and going over and over and over till I could do it in my sleep. But everything else is pretty much, you know, the technical part is a preparation, live, mostly improvised.
Awesome. That was my follow-up. It was like when it gets to that scale, because I checked out the Allman Brothers show, it was just huge.
Yeah.
That must have been both a technical challenge and then all the work that you put in.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah. And things change too, you know, I mean, you're dealing with very, like, you know, cable runs, like, you know, you're dealing with, you know, several systems that it goes through. It goes to fiber, to 2 projectors. And it's like you move something and there's so many systems, it takes like at least a second before it hits the screen.
Jeez.
So that there were things like that. But at the same time, you know, that doesn't really change, because once you're like, I'm locked into the screen, in many ways, it's not different than looking at a screen here, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
It was when the first set ended and I heard the roar of all those people. I was like, holy crap. You know, but other than that, it was kind of not much fundamentally different than any other show that I do, because I'm just focusing on the screen and what I'm doing. And it's, you know, yeah.
Awesome.
Were you alone in doing the projection?
No, we had a team. I had another friend of mine, Marco Ferrero, who's an artist who's been doing this for a long time. He stayed at my house. I put him up in my house, and we practiced together for 2 weeks. And there was our video artist as well, mixing us in. And you know, now that I come to think of it, we did actually have lighting cues we had to follow based on color schemes. You know, and the set list, of course, changed every day and like literally right before it. So yeah, it was much more of a team thing too. Yeah.
Is there any other question from the audience? You can also drop question in the chat. I have another one, another question. So yeah, so how much, like, so yeah, you say that you collaborated before with scientists for this Nature article.
Oh yeah.
Or eventually did interaction eventually evolve? How did it make your practice evolve? And like, do you generally interact with scientists to improve your techniques and to develop your medium?
No, not so much. Not as much as I would like to. It's certainly something that I would love to explore more. It's just, opportunities sometimes come, sometimes they don't. So this artwork was used for Nature, but then one of the principal scientists of that article, she happens to work here at the CUNY Advanced Science Research Center in New York. So we got together and we were actually trying to get a grant to kind of do something similar where we would, use like the liquid light show to kind of also showcase the work that she's doing. And as serendipity would have it, there's a city college right next door that has a planetarium. So we got a hold of there's only 3 planetariums in New York City. So we actually got a hold of the gentleman who runs it. Turns out the thing's been derelict for years. He's trying to revamp it. So we all got together, and I that was really fun because it was, the real, like, the micro level, the heavens, and then our human experience, meeting in between. And yeah, I would love to do more of that. Just the opportunities haven't came by as much as I'd like them to.
We should definitely talk about that.
Yeah, I'm down, man. Yeah. I'm into it.
Good. Do we have any other question from the audience?
I have a question.
Yeah, Samar.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi. Sorry. So I'm curious how you got into it. For some reason, when you started with the Joshua Light shows in San Francisco, I kind of assumed you just like went to one and like really loved it and decided you wanted to do that with your life. But you said you're based in New York. And so I guess it's 2 questions. Like, how did you get into it? And number 2, how did you find yourself doing this? How did you start your career and move to New York and start doing this stuff?
Oh, well, I'm from New York, and, I'm from New York. Immigrated here and been living here since 1981. But so I'm a New Yorker, I was raised here, but, and the Joshua Light Show is actually from New York as well, where the Fillmore East was. But I'm of an age where, this kind of artwork was not something that I had ever experienced. I had first really seen it, and if you ever seen the Monterey Pop Festival movie, there's some liquid light shows there, and that's, my parents had that video. I was also really into like rock music and the history of rock. So by looking at concert posters, I always saw, the poster art for these concerts in the 60s was really beautiful. So you look at all that stuff, the light show was also named too. So I was aware that these light shows had existed, but I had not done, had never actually really seen one other than a couple of like VJ things. And then the reason I really got into it is because for the 14 years prior to doing light shows, I was also a musician. And, long story short, I was playing with a band, stopped playing with the band because, bands have politics and all that, but I was still hung out with them, and they had the worst stage presence. They were so boring to watch. And I was like, you guys need something, you guys need a light show. And at first I was going to just, this was back when Flash was a thing, and you can build Flash interfaces and control them. So I was going to kind of use a laptop and a digital projector and move things around on the screen. I didn't have much money at the time to afford either one of those, but I had known about these old, or quote unquote old light shows that used overhead projectors. And I said, well, how much is an overhead projector? And then I quickly realized that I don't have to program anything. I can just put, even like little lighting gels or translucent things, and I can move it around, by hand in time and really interpret the music in real time. And once I realized that, so started doing that and, using overhead projectors and adding more of them. And as the gigs got bigger, then I kind of started moving on to video capture devices as well,
Great. So I think we are good in time. We should. This is the end now. So before leaving, thank you very much, Steve, for this beautiful talk.
Yes, thank you.
And this discussion and this conversation. And I want to also remind people that there is. So we dropped in the chat. Andrew dropped in the chat the poster for the next speaker, Elizabeth Bouchot, next week. So you have the link here. For people in my class and people on the list, on the email list, you will receive it very soon. And yeah, with this, I'd like to wish you a good day to everyone, and see you hopefully next week.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for everybody that tuned in, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day and be safe, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.